And let's see when it starts. There's the countdown. So, hello, folks. We had some technical difficulty on my end. I don't know what the hell happened, but we got cut off. So this will be the part 2 of my interview, my favorite horror episode with Stephen Kozeniewski. We were in the middle of talking about clickers.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking about how I discovered clickers on Amazon, and right after I ordered that from Amazon, going through my recommendations, and there was this book called Mandibles by some guy I had never heard of, Jeff Strand or something. And I immediately ordered that. And so J.F. Gonzalez and Clickers led me to Jeff Strand. And I'm looking up at the shelf. They're on my Brian Keene shelf. And I have 4 different versions, basically, in the Clickers series. So like I said, I have the original with the pink logo. And then Clickers 2, I have paperback from DB. I don't remember who that is. Delirium Books?
Yeah.
And then the next one I have is a hardback for Clickers 3. And then Clickers versus Zombies might be Deadite?
Yeah, if you have the paperback, yeah.
Yeah, and then Clickers Forever. But yeah, so like basically 4 different, but my set doesn't match.
Right.
It drives me crazy. And now this is from Macabre Inc.
Right.
But the covers do all sort of, except for that first one, the covers all match. And then that led to my love for Jeff Strand. I ordered like 5 of his books in 5 weeks. Just kept ordering over and over again, whatever I could find. All right, let's see. So now I'm like all out of sorts because we got interrupted. Talking about clickers. I think maybe it's time to get to the main event.
Okay.
Seems like a good time since this is going to be part 2 of the thing. So, but before we do, I do this thing where I have fake sponsors because no one's sponsoring this. I'm making nothing from this, and I'm hoping maybe if I keep promoting people's stuff, I'll get something out of it. But it seems to me I'm promoting people for free, so I'm never going to get anything out of it. But anyway, today's fake sponsor, they are not sponsoring this show. I decided to go with Scream Factory, part of Shout Factory. I have my Scream Factory edition of Return of the Living Dead. I don't know if this logo will be too blurry, but I'll put it up there. Scream Factory. For all your horror movie needs, Scream Factory puts out fantastic collector's editions. They restore the video. Just for example, on this Return of the Living Dead, there's 2 discs. And they port over old special features. There are 4 commentaries on this disc. 2 from the old release, 2 new ones to this release. The second disc is all just special features. There's so much great stuff on here and on all of their releases. And I have classics like The Fog and Night of the Comet. They have newer stuff like Happy Death Day and Happy Death Day to You. They'll do special editions with action figures and posters and pins, steel books. I have Humanoids from the Deep with the steel book. I have tons and tons of Scream Factory. If you're a horror movie fan, if you like all the bells and whistles, I recommend Scream Factory, part of Shout Factory. They put out a really good product. Oh, and they have reversible artwork usually. We'll do this. We'll take this apart. So, if I can, there we go. So that's the new artwork for this. And then you have you can flip
the classic.
Flip it around, and there's the classic.
Yep.
I usually, anytime I get something from them, I check and make that decision. Which side do I want displayed? Sometimes I like to go with the classic. Sometimes the new art is really good. But that's our non-sponsor, folks. Check out Scream Factory. They put out a good product, and they have great catalog of stuff. They just released a majority, if not all, of the Halloween movies in 4K. And my Halloween 3 and Halloween 2 that I have are both Scream Factory. I actually don't have a copy of the original Halloween, which is embarrassing. But anyway, that's it. That's our fake sponsor for this episode, Scream Factory. Check them out. Now, let's get to the main event. Folks, this is going to be spoilery. We're going to talk about anything we want to talk about in this movie. There's going to be spoilers. So if you've never seen Return of the Living Dead, pause this video, go watch this fantastic movie, and then come back and hear us talk about it. But obviously, I've said it enough. Stephen Kozeniewski chose Return of the Living Dead to talk about as his favorite horror. So first of all, Stephen, can you give us a quick synopsis of the movie?
So there's two dummies. One's an older dummy who has worked in a medical supply warehouse for all his life. And then the other one is a younger dummy who just started working there. And as the older guy is showing the younger guy the ropes, they discover a canister in the basement. I'm sorry, can you hear me echoing, or is that me? Or
there's a little scratching noise every once in a while, but it's not bad, and I don't hear an echo.
Okay. So they discover this canister in the basement, and it turns out that it is a canister of 2,4,5-trioxin, which is by far the best trioxin. If you've watched all of the Return of the Living Dead series, 2,4,5-trioxin is the trioxin you want.
Trioxin champions.
That is a chemical that brings the dead back to life, which they accidentally release, and in the process of trying to cover up their dumbness, they accidentally spread it to an entire graveyard full of corpses, apparently all very recently buried because they all claw their way out and lay waste to this small portion of the town of is it Lovell, Kentucky?
Louisville, Kentucky.
Yeah. And that's the super short version.
All right. Yeah. And why did you choose this as the film to talk about? I mean, you gave me two choices, and I said, let's do this one, but it was one of your two choices. So
this is by far my favorite horror movie. I return to it time and time again. I probably watched it for the first time like in college, and I was just immediately enamored. I remember the first thing I did was I ran to the phone when I still had a landline. I ran to the phone and immediately called the number on the trioxin barrel. And of course it was, I don't know, I probably got charged $9.99 a minute or something for it. Was no longer a functioning Return of the Living Dead fan line or anything. But it's just, I was thinking about it when I was rewatching it today in preparation for this. I was like, this movie has not a shred of fat on it. I was watching it today and I was like, an hour and is it really an hour and a half? Because there is so much that goes on in this movie.
Oh yeah. And
for a second I was like, it can't possibly be only an hour and a half. But I was like, it is. And it's like, there is not a wasted a lot of times you go back to these 80s movies. 80s movies, not so bad, but especially if you go back to those 40s and 50s and 60s movies, it's like, we're vamping for time. Here's some establishing shots, and here's the characters talking about thus and such, and la 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 la. And with Return of the Living Dead, it's just so perfectly paced. Like every scene, every piece of dialogue, it's either a joke or it furthers the plot or something. It's just like you're constantly engaged by this movie. and just the way that it ramps up, like it doesn't even feel like a small budget schlocky 80s movie. It feels like, oh shit, this is like like this could have really happened. And they frame it that way. They frame it like as though it's a documentary, with like they're like, here's what happened at 4 a.m. and here's what happened at 7 p.m. and
well, it
which it's
starts with a
not.
title card that says these are
true.
true events.
Yeah.
And oddly, they don't give you the names have been changed. They're like, these are real people. These are their real names.
Right. Which I think I'll go on record now as saying that this was not a true story.
I'm shocked. Yeah, it's a fantastic film. I rewatched. I got home from work and rewatched it right before we started. And I'm gonna have to dig into all of these special features that are on here because that's why I still get physical media. I want those special features. As I said, you gave me two choices, and I'll tell you why I picked this one. I have fond, mixed feelings. I saw this in the theater. I don't know that it was opening weekend, but it was when it was first released. And I was visiting the first girl that I ever loved. She lived in a different town. I went to see her. We went out to see this movie. And just a few short hours later, she told me she was not in love with me anymore. And I had my heart ripped from my chest.
Oh, wow.
But fortunately, I am not the kind to associate that bad thing with this wonderful thing. I was never the type I can never watch that movie again because of what happened. So yes, I've watched this many, many times. I absolutely love it. But I do always think, and I'm actually still friends with that young lady. And I've been to one of her weddings. But yeah, so I do have that association with the film. But we'll still look at each other and just brains. More brains. So yeah, let's kind of get into the movie.
Well, now see, that's an important thing you bring up there. Not just a great movie, but also the source of that part of pop culture.
Yes.
Which I think a lot of people, if they think of the living dead or zombies, they think of one or two things, which is, they're gross and they shamble out of their graves and then they eat brains. And that entire aspect, it never happened before this. That was established in this.
Right. Well, the dead lady that they have strapped to the table says, because I think he asked, why do you eat people? And she says, not people, brains. And the other thing, people always talk about the Dawn of the Dead remake or 28 Days Later, and I'm going to go off on a rant on that in a second, but people always talk about those two as where fast zombies came from. But these were fast zombies.
Correct.
Fast, intelligent,
and indestructible.
They would speak. Yeah, I'm one of those people that just 28 Days Later is not a zombie movie.
I agree with you. If they were never dead, they're not zombies.
Yeah, and I tell people, I'm like, you don't have to shoot them in the head. They're just infected people. You could shoot them in the heart. It will stop them. They are not zombies. But yes. But anyway, yeah, so fast zombies, talking zombies, the whole brain thing. And the pedigree of this movie. Story by John A. Russo and a couple other people. But John A. Russo, of course, very important in zombies. And then directed and screenplay by Dan O'Bannon, who, of course, wrote Alien.
Mm-hmm.
Although I do feel that he ripped that off from an old science fiction movie called It, The Terror from Outer Space, something like that. Are you familiar with that movie?
I am not.
There's an expedition on Mars, They're leaving to come back to Earth. When they take off from Mars, they don't realize that this killer alien creature is on the ship, and it hunts them down and kills them one by one until the last person shoots it out of an airlock. When I saw Alien, I was like, wait a minute. I've seen this in a black and white version.
Yep.
But yeah, so you got Dan O'Bannon, Clu Gulager, Linnea Quigley, Miguel Nunez, and then I can never remember like all the other people that are in. James Karen and Don Calfa, who I love. He's great. So yeah, we start at the supply house, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they start setting things up. We see the half dog and some other things, and we know that. Let's see. I got to check names. I always have to check names. Frank is only going to be there for another hour, and he's showing Freddy the ropes.
Freddy. Yep.
Yeah, and he tells them about this trioxin, and they go down in the basement and release that gas. And I think that's when the titles kick in.
Yes, and that's such a, even that is such a dynamic scene when you're following the gas as it flows through the ventilator and the music. I mean, we could probably do an entire episode about the music.
The music is so fantastic.
But you have these two guys essentially telling dad jokes to each other.
Yes.
About sort of a gallows humory job, like, this is kind of a shitty job, but hey, kid, I'll bet you think PT stands for pretty tough, but it stands for perfect teeth. They're just kind of like doing like almost like a vaudevillian thing. Then and he even says like, oh, this is made by the U.S. Army. Slaps it.
Yeah.
And it immediately falls apart.
Yes.
And that's when it kicks in, and the music stings, and the smoke is flowing, and you're like, oh shit, this is a horror movie. Just a beautiful opening sequence.
Oh, and before that happens, we have the eye chart in the office that says, if you take the time to read it, and I don't remember exactly, I'm sure it's in like the IMDb trivia. Bert, who is the owner of the place.
Yeah.
Bert is a
slave master
driver.
Or something. Yeah.
Bert is a slave driver and a cheapskate, something. Oh, and he's bald, growing bald, something like that. But it's, it's done like an eye chart with just the B and then URT and then so you actually have to like stop and pay attention and read it if you care about those little details, which I do. I love that kind of stuff. And then and we see the again, checking names. Frank is telling Freddy that Night of the Living Dead was based on a true story. And that's where these barrels came from. And we have the property of the U.S. Department of whatever, or the Army, and it has a number to call and everything. And there's a dead body inside, which disappears. Oh, but it must have melted when it hit
melted.
The air. Yeah, it melted. Yeah, the music, the score and the soundtrack, both phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, it's a significant part of the story. I don't know how dialed in Dan O'Bannon was to the punk scene or anything. You kind of get the impression not so much.
Yeah.
But it's a significant portion of the story that all of Freddy's friends, except for I guess his girlfriend, are punks of 1985, and then the punk rock on the soundtrack, like the Cramps and Surfing Dead and all those songs are just like so of the time, but also like they were talking about the Living Dead and the zombie. All those metal and punk bands at the time were talking about this kind of stuff, and it just like went in seamlessly.
Well, let's see. I have a list on IMDb. We've got the soundtrack. So if this comes up, let's see. Deadbeat Dance by The Damned.
Mm-hmm.
Eyes Without a Face, performed by the Flesh Eaters. Tonight We'll Make Love Until We Die. And of course, the one I think everybody knows, Party Time by 45 Grave, which is the iconic scene. Surfin' Dead, as you said, Burn the Flames. Just, and they play them at the right time, and they just fit. It's such a great soundtrack. And again, the original score as well just works so well. And it starts with that title sequence.
Yeah.
So then we meet. So Frank and Freddy breathe in this gas,
right,
and are knocked out. And then we meet the punks.
Yeah, they're knocked out. Well, first we meet Colonel Glover.
Oh, that's right. I wanted to. Yeah, it's such an oddly paced movie because we have that, and then all of a sudden we just go to something that seems so completely out of place, and we don't. It's so long before it comes back. Yeah, so we meet Colonel Glover.
And that famous, I do always remember that scene where his wife says, "Oh, I'm making lamb for dinner," and he's like, "Nah, had it for lunch." Like it's just like you instantly know what a jerk off.
Yes,
his wife made him a nice dinner, and who the hell eats lamb for lunch?
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Well, we learn at the end he has monogrammed pajamas, so
yes,
come on. Yeah, that is a weird sort of turn that it takes. That you've had this, we're in this medical supply store and we get the gas and the dead bodies and all this stuff, and then all of a sudden it's just the Pacific Coast and some military guy coming home to his wife, and they just have a conversation, and then then they disappear for most of the movie.
Yeah.
And then we meet the punks. And there's like levels of punkdom.
Yes.
Amongst them, because you've got the guy with the mohawk, but then you've got the guy with the
suicide, right?
Pattern shaved in his head with the chain that goes from his ear to his nostril, and Linnea Quigley, who's all about death and stuff, and then the dude that I can't remember the guy, the sort of dorky one.
Yeah,
doesn't seem to quite fit. Maybe a little bit more than Freddy's girlfriend Tina, who seems just like straight.
Right.
Completely normal. And then Miguel Nunez, less punk, I think, than the others. But I think they're all interesting characters. And I got to look at the nerdy, if I can find the nerdy guy. Do you remember his name?
I know. It was Scuzz.
There's Scuzz.
Scuzz, Trash. They're all named something like that.
Yeah.
Scuzz, Trash, Suicide, Spider. But I can't remember what the nerdy guy's name was.
Is he just Chuck?
Yeah, it was like Dan or Chuck. Maybe
there's a character named Chuck, and he was always hitting on the one girl.
Yeah.
And she was always putting him off, and he just seemed like this obnoxious character. But then later in the movie, like he's the one helping. All right, I'm gonna look. He's the one helping Spider nail up the door. And when I'm kind of jumping around, but when they're all on the run and he gets separated, and he's with the other girl, Casey, I think it is. He could be a dick and just run through the door and leave her, but he stops, opens the door, waits to make sure she gets in and she's safe. So he seems like kind of a douchebag character, but then his actions are a little heroic.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because most of them turn out to be different than they originally seemed.
Yeah.
Like Spider is the one that really takes charge towards the end. Like he's the only one that's like really like straight face. Even when Bert and Ernie, that's classic, supposedly unintentional, but even when Bert and Ernie are like flipping out, Spider's like, "All right, you guys need to shut up, and we need to figure this out." I guess Suicide really did turn out to be a dick, like he appeared in the beginning, but yeah, it was interesting how how much they all turned out to, show their true colors when the zombies started appearing.
Yeah, I think all of the characters are very well written. They all have distinct personalities. Um, so we meet the punks. We find out that Tina's dating Freddy, and they're looking for some place. They want a party. She says, "Well, Freddy gets off at 10. He always knows where there's a party." So they're going to go hang out in the cemetery and wait for him to get off work. And then we get back to Frank and Freddy. They wake up, and like at the time that I first saw this, that half dog amazed me. I thought that was fantastic because now the gas that was released from the tank has spread throughout the building that has all of these dead things in it. The butterflies pinned to the board that are still flapping.
Yeah.
And the half dogs that vets use for training. There's one laying on the floor panting. Just fantastic stuff. All those nice little touches. And then the cadaver in the freezer.
The weirdly yellow cadaver.
Yes.
And while I never understood why they do that, like what the in-universe explanation for that would be, I know as a, film watcher, I'm like, well, if filmmakers made him yellow, so he'd be really distinct. They'd be like, oh yeah, the yellow guy. Like there's the tar man.
Yes.
There's that weirdly green half woman that you were talking about that they captured. And then there's the yellow guy, which like they're all very distinct, these featured zombies,
Yeah. So they try to put, well, they call Clu Gulager back because they don't know what to do, and they decide they're gonna, the movies say destroy the brain and you're good to go, and that doesn't work. And this all leads up to what I think is a great idea in the movie, and how you end up with these zombie hordes is they cut up that body, they take it to the mortuary next door, well, not quite next door, but in the area. And I love that. I love Ernie. So good. Got his Walkman on. He's got his Luger on his hip. And they figure Clu Gulager's character, Bert, wants to destroy all evidence that anything happened. He's afraid he's going to lose his job, maybe go to jail. So they cremate the body. And that causes everything goes out the smokestack. I think this is a brilliant way to do it. That smoke goes up into the clouds and it rains. And now that chemical that has brought the dead back to life has washed through the graveyard.
Right. And Linnea Quigley, who we last left finding out she's an exhibitionist in addition to being a necrophiliac of some description, has gotten naked.
Yes.
So everybody's getting hit with this acid rain, and they all immediately realize that there's something up with it. But Trash is like, I am in real pain because she's naked and now she's soaked with trioxin 2,4,5.
Yes. Yeah, she gives a very interesting performance. Talks about, did you ever think about all the ways to die?
No, I never did.
Well, I try not to think about death. And then of course, she thinks the worst way to die is to be, I forget exactly how she puts it, something about old men devouring her body, something weird.
Ripped apart.
Yeah, maybe ripped, something very weird, which of course is what ends up happening, essentially. And excuse me, Frank and Freddy are getting sicker, and our punks get separated. I mean, as you said, there's so much that's going on here. And we're following a nice little group of different groups of characters. So well done, just so well done.
Yeah, and then that's where you kind of get into the some of the social commentary. And the weird thing, I know people don't like the second one. I like the second one almost as much as the first. I know that's sort of sacrilege in the horror community, but when the Freddy character comes back, and he's got sort of a doppelganger of sorts. They brought a couple of the actors back for the second one, and the Freddy character in the second one has a similar kind of trajectory with his girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And it when he comes back from the dead, they immediately have this very toxic relationship, which is filtered through the lens of now he's a zombie craving brains, and we've seen nothing of their actual relationship before, so we don't
Right.
know. As far as we can tell, he seemed like a goofball. We don't know that much about Freddy, but when he comes back from the dead, he's got this whole like, baby, you need to give me more, you need to give me your brains. I need
Yeah.
your brains now, baby. That's what I need. And it's so like on point with the way that abusers are and the way that abusers make you feel like you owe them something. In both the first one and the second one, I think the second one is the one where he's it's a little more pointed, but in this one there's like I said, Freddy's a goofball right up until that point where he resurrects as a zombie, and then he's chasing around Tina and he's blinded.
Yes.
But
I do want to say I think his turn I thought was fantastic. He's been suffering because essentially he and Frank are dead. The trioxin killed them, and so they're going through their room when the paramedics come. Their room temperature. They have no blood pressure. They have no pulse. They're in rigor mortis. Blood is pooling. So when they're locked up in the chapel and she's holding him, you can see the moment when he dies. And then there's just a little flick of his eyes when he comes back.
right.
Or when, I mean, technically he's dead, I guess. But when the change happens,
over, yeah.
yeah, you can just see it. And he relaxes because he's been all tensed up and in pain this whole time. He dies, and there's a relaxation, and his eyes just flick, and you know that he's back now. And as you said, he's trying to cajole her for brains, but he's also blaming her for things. You talk about this abusive relationship. He's like, look what you made me do to you. Made me hurt myself getting out of that room. And when he's beating on the attic door, look what you made me break my hand. Yeah, definitely becomes an abusive relationship. And we don't know. He seemed like a nice guy from what we saw. He's didn't have like the suicide punk attitude. Seemed to get along well enough with Frank. Seemed to want to learn the job. He's nice, he's goofy. Tina obviously loves him because she stays with him once she gets back to him. But yeah, he makes once he's dead, it makes that switch.
Yeah. And of course there's that implication because then they have that in contrast to what happens to Frank.
Yes.
And I think that's part of what's beautiful about it, because with everything else that's been going on in the movie, we know the zombies can't control themselves. We do know that. But with Freddy, he immediately reverts to this kind of abuser persona for whatever reason. So, but Frank realizes he's become a monster, and he's like, I don't want to hurt the ones I love. I don't want to hurt Bert and my friends. I think he mentions, he calls his wife in the beginning. So we know he's got a family at home that he wants to get home to, but he chooses to burn himself up. Mm-hmm. So we know that to some extent that was always in Freddy, because they both got hit at the same time and took very different paths.
Yes.
And I always thought that was such a like nuance of it, that they could have very easily said, well, you become a zombie and then you're just, that's it.
Right.
And that seems to be what happens to 99% of them, but it's not 100%.
But and Yeah, his wife calls him at the beginning when he's telling the story about Night of the Living Dead. So we know he's married, and it seems very nice. He's, no, I'll be home in an hour. Keep the pot roast warm. I love you, honey. And then, yeah, when he sneaks out of the chapel when they're all fighting Freddy, goes down to the crematorium, and just again one of those beautiful touches, takes his wedding ring off.
Yep.
And puts it on that little switch or lever, whatever it is he put it on. And he seems as if he's crying as he pulls himself into the flames. Yes. And again, so thinking zombies, and of course talking, we have the famous brains, but then they kill the Bert and Ernie have called paramedics for Frank and Freddy. They get killed, and one of the zombies grabs the microphone or the radio, whatever, and says, "Send more paramedics." And then after the cops have come and the two cops are killed, one of the zombies takes their radio and says, "Send more cops." Because they're smart and they're hungry.
Yeah, those are two of the classic lines.
Send more paramedics. And he even says, I had completely forgotten, that zombie actually even says, "Hello, dispatch."
Right.
Send more paramedics. And then you have I forgot. I thought the half woman was already on the table. Like that's what Ernie was working on. But she's actually one of the zombies attacking, and they cut her in half.
Right. They pull her through the boards or something, right?
They're pulling her through, and they actually chop her spine.
Yeah.
But the effects, like they tie her down to that gurney or table, and her spine just keeps wiggling. It's just creepy.
Yeah, and you can hear it clunk a few times.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of gooiness there. Yeah, I mean, I love the effects. I love the characters. It looks great on the, restored Scream Factory Blu-ray, and I have my first high def 4K TV. Looked beautiful. It's the best I've ever seen it. What else? There's so much that goes on.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said, the effects are they're weirdly good and charming.
Yes.
Like I think you were hinting at the dog doesn't quite stand up in 2022, because now you look at it and you're like, okay, it's clearly just a puppet. And when he picks it up, but there's this very long history of people and puppets interacting, and it's funny. But I felt like all of the effects, from the Tar Man and the Half Woman and all of these creature effects, they really thread that line where I'm looking at it, and maybe with a super critical eye, I can tell they're not real, but they're all practical effects, and they all have such charm and kind of love poured into them. Like, these practical effects were made by people who obviously, cared about this, that you look at it and you're like, yeah, I like it. It stands up. It's almost 30 years later, but like the Tar Man is still creepy, and the chopped up arms and stuff, like they do. It's like they really threaded that needle of comedy horror, where they're like, it's freaky, it's funny, it's weird, it's not, and you're not immediately put off by it. You're not immediately like, oh wow, that's fake.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, 99% of the time, I want practical effects in my horror.
Right.
Obviously, there's some things you can't do practical. If getting into creature features, giant creature kind of things, and they can do wonderful things with CGI now for that sort of thing. But for something like this, give me practical all the way.
Oh yeah.
And I like a little grit to my horror movies. One of the things with modern day horror, especially studio, modern day horror is, and it doesn't take away from how good the movie is necessarily, but they look too slick and too clean to me. They're too shiny, for lack of a better way to put it.
Sure.
And I like a little grit to it. I mean, it's a horror movie, but that's me.
Yeah, and like not to wax nostalgic or anything. I mean, I guess we'd be the only horror people that don't wax nostalgic, but I feel like that era was so unique, that 80s era, because the writing's on the fucking wall with I guess it was Terminator 2 was kind of, that was it, because Terminator 2 mostly practical effects, but he had those first CGI effects and used really well.
Yes.
And then after that, everybody was just like in a rush to use CGI. And so that was like 91, 92. And prior to the 80s, there's just like such a variety. Like the effects were all practical. They had to be, but it's like depending on the budget and depending on the care and like you watch movies from the 60s and you're like, okay, it's chocolate syrup and whatever. But during that period in the 80s, when your only option was practical effects, but the technology was there, that's when you get things like an American Werewolf in London, or your Return of the Living Deads and your Reanimators, and these, like that's like where practical effects were both 100% necessary and 100% organic. Like if you or I did it today, it would be a total would be like making a statement. We'd be like, we're only using practical effects. Like we clearly don't have to do that. But back then they had to make the movie work. So there's that urgency of what it needs to be a practical effect, but the technology was also there. And I feel like this was in that heyday, that period.
Yeah. And the love. I think you had the people that were doing it, and that isn't to say the people that do it now don't love it, but they're just seem to be the people that, your Tom Savini's.
Right.
I don't know exactly when KNB came around. That might have been 90s, but like that was, if I saw KNB was listed in the credits of a movie, I want to watch that movie. Love their stuff. Rick Baker, right? I felt like I was going to say the wrong thing. Unfortunately, I couldn't tell you who worked on John Carpenter's The Thing off the top of my head.
Oh yeah.
But those amazing, amazing effects that people were doing. Yeah, exactly. And I will say, I think I'm in the minority. I prefer Terminator to Terminator 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm an original fan. To me, that's Terminator's a horror movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
And saw it in the theater. Had a great time. Those effects don't always stand up.
Yeah, like the cartoon.
Couple little things in there.
Yeah.
But I love it. Love that movie. But I'm trying to see. Well, again, I don't know how well that'll show up. We get reflections. There's the half lady tied to the table. Of course, Tarman right there in the middle. And yeah, they went a little crazy with Linnea Quigley's face once she was turned. She had sort of that distended jaw. But it looked great. Are we forgetting anything? Anything important we should be touching on here?
Well, I think we hit everything. I guess, I mean, we didn't either of us do our rewatches to talk about this too at length, but I did want to talk about the sequels a little bit, just because I'm such a Return of the Living Dead head, and I have unfortunately watched all of the sequels.
Well, before we get into it, before you get into it, I will say I've seen the second one, I think only once, but I recall enjoying it. I've seen the third one. Didn't enjoy it as much as the first two, but still fine. And that's it. That's all I've seen.
That's
Please.
all you need to see.
Take us to school.
So, like I said, the second one is the one that people don't like because they took it and they made it for kids. So they were like, first of all, happy ending. Well, we didn't talk about the ending. Obviously, it's super downer ending.
Yes.
Super downer ending to the original. They drop the nuke and they're like, well, the problem's solved, but with that strong implication that the rain is coming and that the problem is not really solved.
Yeah, so we come back to the Colonel from the beginning, who we never saw again until the end, because Bert and some of them are finally able to make it back down into the basement and call the number.
Right.
Oh, and I love the scene where they call the cops, and he's talking to the police, and he hears the zombies overrun the cops.
Overrun the cops, yeah.
And he's like, we're screwed. I'm going to call that number.
Right.
And then, so he calls the number. He thinks
the army's coming to save us.
Yeah. And then and it's pretty quick too. It's just a couple of phone calls and a nuke. And they just blow it up. And they're like, 4,000 dead, acceptable casualties. And then, we see the mushroom cloud. We see smoke going up into the clouds, and it starts raining again. So, the implications are not good. So that was the ending of the first one. Now,
so with the second one, I don't actually hate it as much as people do. I think there's a lot to recommend it. Like I said, they brought some of the same actors back as different characters. So you get that sort of like, oh yeah, I remember him. But I get it. People don't like they had the Michael Jackson Thriller routine and that kind of thing. And then at the end they're like that was the whole thing was these zombies are indestructible, hence why you needed a nuke or fire or something. Like you physically have to reduce them to ash. And then the second one, they're like, oh yeah, electricity will knock them out too. So
isn't that what causes the Michael Jackson Thriller thing?
Correct.
They're all being zapped and it's causing them to.
Yeah.
That's the only part I really remember.
Yeah. That's the only part a lot of people remember. But there's funny things too. There's the guy gets his hand cut off, but he still flips off the driver. Like there's some good stuff in that one. And then the third one is this real departure.
Yeah.
It's Melinda Clark, and it's this weird Romeo and Juliet story. It's Brian Yuzna who did the Reanimator.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this weird Romeo and Juliet story where I think he was the daughter of a general or a colonel who for some reason had access to the trioxin. And then when his girlfriend dies, he resurrects her. And then she spends the whole movie kind of doing, I guess we'd say, the Frank thing rather than the Freddy thing. And she's trying to fight it and fight it and fight it. And in that one, they introduced the idea that piercing could distract you from the pain. And so she becomes like heavily pierced by the end and becomes kind of this iconic, zombie model. And there's a lot to recommend that one, but there's not a ton of zombie carnage was the thing.
Right.
I think that's probably why you remember not liking it as much, because there's like 5 minutes in the beginning of zombie carnage and like 5 minutes in the end of zombie carnage, and then the rest is kind of this star-crossed lovers, we're on the run, and once in a while I murder somebody for their brains thing. So that was the solid trilogy. I think it was like 85, 87, or 88, and like 93. And then it went off the books for a million years.
88 and 93.
And then around 2005, 2006, I remember it broadcast on the Sci-Fi Channel. And they came back with Return of the Living Dead 4 and 5, which was Rave to the Grave and
Necropolis?
Necropolis, yeah.
IMDb has both of those as 2005.
Okay. And then those two, it's like, I was so disappointed. I was all amped up. I was excited for those. Rave to the Grave was a little bit better, and it had the Tar Man. But basically, what happened was they said, "Oh, there's no more such thing as trioxin 245, but now we have this trioxin like 3, and what it does is it turns you into regular zombies that you shoot in the head." And I was like, "Well, then what was the point of making this a Return of the Living Dead movie? Like, why
Right.
take everything that was special and get rid of that? Why not just make another zombie movie?" And I think, yeah, Necropolis was the one that was in the city, obviously. And Rave to the Grave was a little bit better. What they did was they made what do you call it? Ecstasy
Right.
pills. They were making homemade ecstasy pills at college, and they put trioxin in it, and then they started handing out the trioxin at a rave. And I remember the Tar Man was there trying to hitch a ride to the rave. So that one was like mildly amusing, but it was just like everything that was, unique about Return of the Living Dead, and you were just like, fuck it, throw all that out. Uh, so I don't know. I hope that they'll bring the series back in some capacity in the future.
Yeah, I would buy 2 and 3. As I said, I believe I only saw either of them once when they first came out, so I don't really remember much about them except that I enjoyed both of them 2 a little more than 3. I've seen, I think, bits and pieces from the other 2, and wasn't enough to like catch my attention and get me to watch. They both looked like those cheap made for sci-fi movies.
That's exactly what they were too.
I wouldn't be surprised to find out they were made by the Asylum Group.
Might be. That sounds
Uh,
like about the right era.
I don't know if IMDb will tell me who made them. Um, don't know. No, a quick look doesn't tell me anything, but I'll have to look deeper maybe at some point. I was so excited when I got this new TV. It's a Samsung, and it has Samsung TV Plus. There is an Asylum channel.
Oh,
Even better though, for me, and I have it on almost constantly. There's a Riff Tracks channel.
nice.
That's my background now. Whenever I'm doing anything else, I just have Riff Tracks on in the background. Did you find any Asylum information?
I did not find that it was made by the Asylum, but you're right. It's about of that quality there.
Yeah. All right. So any final thoughts at all about Return of the Living Dead or any of the rest of the series? Any final words?
Check it out if you haven't. Classic, a bunch of classics worth revisiting.
Absolutely. Okay. Anything else that you want to plug, talk about, tell us what you've got coming up, anything like that?
Well, like we said, the big thing we're pushing right now is Clickers Never Die. I guess if this ends up being 2 episodes, we'll primarily have talked about it on the first one.
Yeah.
But yeah, please go out and grab a copy, or get in touch with me if you want a signed copy. Like we said over there, I'm really hoping that this is a big hit and does a lot for the Gonzalez, family. And you know, I think it's really good. Wiley and I really, poured our heart and souls into it, and we've got high hopes for it. So,
Right. All right. I had a question, and then what else of yours is available if people want to pick up some of your other stuff?
sure. So, Brain Eater Jones, zombie. That's the zombie detective novel. The Ghoul Archipelago. That's more of a classic zombie apocalypse, but it's set in the South Pacific. And those are the big zombie ones since we've been talking about zombie all the time. But yeah, if you can spell my name right, you can find my whole catalog on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, your favorite bookseller.
Great. All right. And where, if you care to share, where can people find you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So on Twitter, it's Outfortune, short for Outrageous Fortunes, which I don't do anymore. But again, I'm on Twitter and Facebook. If you can spell it right, you can probably find me. And if you go to my website, that's Manuscripts Burn. That's kind of my hub. So all the social media and everything is all, redirected from there. So that's probably your best place to start.
All right. Great. Thank you very much. If you could just hang out for a moment so I can do my outro. There you have it, folks. Thank you to my guest, Stephen Kozeniewski. And for those of you watching, if you have any comments or questions or anything, put them in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. You know, all that YouTube stuff. I think that's all we've got. So, yeah, until next time, folks, read more books.